Hey, good morning. Come on, we're going to worship together this morning. Sing along wherever you are.
Waking up from the longest night, fixing my eyes on a new horizon. Joy before me, leave the past behind. There's no turning back, there's no turning back. Boldly I run into your presence, faith like a child, known and protected here in your arms. My shame is unraveling, unraveling. You make me fearless, fearless. You calm my heart out of the dark. Fearless, fearless. Finally free, your spirit makes me fearless. I was living underneath gray skies. Now I'm dancing in the light of heaven. Grace has found me, brought me back to life. There's no turning back, there's no turning back. Boldly I run into your presence, faith like a child, known and protected here in your arms. My shame is unraveling, unraveling. You make me fearless, fearless. You calm my heart out of the dark. Fearless, fearless. Finally free, your spirit makes me fearless, fearless. I'm alive to praise you. I was made to love you. I'm alive to praise you. There's no turning back, there's no turning back. Let's sing this. I'm alive to praise you. I was made to love you. I'm alive to praise you. There's no turning back, there's no turning back. Fearless, fearless. You calm my heart out of the dark. Fearless, fearless. Finally free, your spirit makes me fearless. You calm my heart out of the dark. Fearless, fearless. Finally free, your spirit makes me fearless. Fearless, fearless, fearless.
Hey, that's great. There's so many reasons to be afraid in the world today, but God can make us fearless. Thank you, Holy Spirit. We worship you, God.
Mountains are still being moved. Strongholds are still being loosed. God, we believe it. Yes, we can see that wonders are still what you do. Bodies are still being raised. Giants are still being slain. God, we believe it. Yes, we can see that wonders are still what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what bodies still being raised, giants are still being slain. God, we believe, yes, we can see that wonders are still what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. Set our hearts on you. Come and do what you do, 'cause we need to move. We need to move. We need to move. Oh, we need to move. Hey. Miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming. Miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming. We need to move. Oh, this is a move. 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 We are here for you. Come and do what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. Set our hearts on you. Come and do what you do, 'cause this is a move. Hey, hey. Yes, God, better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. Come on, sing that, just that part of, we are here for you. Come and do what you can do, what only you can do. What one day in your courts takes 1,000 days elsewhere to do, God. God, give us that one day. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. Set our hearts on you. Come and do what you do. This is a move. This is a move. Oh, this is a move. This is a move. I searched the world, it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. You came along and put me back together. Every desire is now satisfied, given your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you. Not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and thoughts. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you.
Set this morning. It's awesome.
Yeah, very good.
Awesome.
My name is Josiah, and I'm here with Pastor Dave, and we get the privilege of being pastors of this church in the region of BC, the interior health region of BC, I guess.
Central BC.
I don't know.
Although it's not really center, it's kind of like the lower bottom.
It's here,
yeah, it's
where
here.
we are.
We're here. Yeah.
Where you are, where we are, it's that region. That's what it is.
Yeah, Revelstoke to Kamloops to Penticton.
There you go.
Sort of.
And we're in the middle of a series. We are on our 4th week in this series. It's gone quickly, actually.
Really quick.
But we have one more week next week as well.
Next week's going to be
going to be good too.
Yeah.
They're all going to be good. But if you've missed a week in the series is called Current Affairs, and what we're doing is we're taking the time to answer some questions about how different ideologies or cultures, as it would be another term in society right now,
Kind
how
of
they
buzzwords
relate,
almost.
how they relate to the church and Christianity. But feel free if you've missed one, tune back in on YouTube. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel right now and hit like on the video now.
And if it's really meaningful, you just let somebody know, share it with somebody.
Totally.
Yeah.
And today we are talking. Last week we talked about social justice in the church. Today we are talking about woke culture in the church.
Culture and the church, not in the church and the church, right?
Woke culture and the church. Yes, woke culture and the church. And I think with every topic. Actually, you said it last week about social justice. I can't remember who you referenced, but a gentleman who had said, social justice is one of those words that we use, but we may not know what it means. And I think in all of these topics, really, that's sort of what we've been on. We've been on this trajectory of talking about topics or ideologies that, maybe we've heard, maybe we haven't, and we may or may not know what they truly mean.
Yeah, and I mean, the Bible tells us that we should kind of, test and evaluate things. And so before we, even talking about woke culture, and, we'll define it in a minute, but, that we don't just jump on what's going on just because it's going on, but we just evaluate and go, does this line up with the Bible? Is this where we should be going?
Yeah.
Because we want to be 100% in where God says we should be in, and we want to be not 100% in if it's not biblical.
And we're not taking the approach on these topics that, it's not woke culture versus the church.
No.
This is not the topic that we're having.
No.
We're having the topic of woke culture and the church, meaning, do they relate? How do they relate? If they relate, is there parts that I need to be careful about? Is there parts that we fully grasp on? Or, just essentially the question is, what are they and how do they relate with the church?
Totally. Let's be knowledgeable.
We obviously have to open up this.
So define woke culture for us.
See, last week I got you, so you thought, okay,
we're getting in this quick.
Woke culture. So for those who have not heard of the term woke culture, woke it's sort of a term that's been around, actually been around a lot longer than I realized through some of my research.
Yeah, but it was more in a particular group rather than broader
it's
society.
become more prevalent, probably even just during the pandemic. So many things in the last year and a half during restrictions, pandemic, all of that sort of stuff. People have, ideologies have expanded rapidly.
Yeah, and a number of specific situations have brought it to the forefront.
Totally. So woke.
Just say my name. I can't breathe.
Yeah.
George Floyd's death. Those all brought it up.
Totally. Now woke. The idea woke actually doesn't have its own definition. So part of the idea behind woke culture or woke is that it is undefinable.
Right.
So this is part of its definition, is it being undefinable? So let me quickly define the undefinable to you. But the idea is...
But how we're talking about it, we need to...
But the idea behind it is being awake to the things that are happening. So it's sort of the idea that you are waking up and realizing what's actually going on. You've probably heard that before, like, oh, that's happening, but what's actually going on is this.
Story behind the story.
The story behind the story. So you're waking up, and we want to, and the concept is we want to stay woke to these issues that we were asleep to.
Right.
And it's been used, like I said, in history. A lot of it does connect to racial injustice.
Sure.
Excuse me. Lots of it does connect to racial injustice or gender stereotypes, those sort of things. In fact, Martin Luther King Jr. used the idea of woke a little bit in some of his stuff, being awake to what was going on.
Sure, yeah. I think one of the sort of the bents, maybe even more of woke culture currently is kind of like this, I'm now woke because I didn't realize I was white privileged. Now I have white privilege, so I didn't realize all these things about myself, so I'm woke to something. Even more in that sense.
Right, yeah. So the idea, to use that, it'd be the idea that before I had white privilege,
right, Just
And
did not.
now I know I have white
Right.
privilege. Exactly. So, it always existed, this white privilege or, this white privilege
Yeah,
always
sure.
existed, but now I'm woke to it, which
Right.
means I know that this white privilege
Yeah.
exists.
And there's a biblical precedent, in Old Testament, those things that you do unknowingly don't have the same degree of responsibility as those things. Once you know,
Right.
he who sins but doesn't know he sins,
Yeah.
there's one thing. But when you sin and you knew that was a sin, well, there's this higher degree of responsibility. So I think behind the woke culture is the idea of greater accountability.
Yeah, definitely.
Because, I was awake.
Yeah, when what can you do about something you didn't realize was happening,
Right.
And now what do I do with the thing that I now realize
Right.
is happening? And that's so in a very broad stroke idea of trying to define something that is somewhat undefinable,
Sure.
because it doesn't, yes, it does relate to racial inequality or racial injustice,
Yeah.
but it doesn't exclusively relate to that.
No, but mostly it's mostly used, at least initially, in the concept of race.
Initially, yeah, but I don't think mostly is actually accurate. I think it is one of the terms, but it really is to be awoke to injustice
Sure.
that exists, that you have been playing a part in
Right.
one way or
Yeah,
the
sure.
other,
Yeah.
unknowingly.
Sure.
Right. So it's the idea of becoming no longer ignorant or naive.
Right. Yeah. And so all sorts of class injustice,
Yep.
race, sex, ableism,
Yep.
ageism, all those things,
Yep.
and how they intersect and
Exactly.
intersectionalization.
Yeah. All of those sort of things.
Yeah, all those fun words that nobody knows what they mean. But yeah.
Well, yeah. So woke culture in the church. So
Right.
there's so prevalent thing today,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
I saw it actually throughout the U.S. political election, talking about some politicians being woke and some politicians being non-woke or
Yeah.
asleep. What's unwoke?
Yeah. Sleep, I guess. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. There is a term. I think it's woke and unwoke. I think that's what it is. I can't remember.
That one I
quite.
don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, woke is not. So we're talking about racial injustice, those sort of things at
Sure.
the moment, or and being awake to these things that have been happening that you maybe have been naive about.
Right.
It is not, though, talked about exclusively as a positive thing.
No, and honestly, in terms of probably evangelical Christendom, it's almost mocked in a lot of ways.
Right.
The idea of being woke is where I've seen some churches advertise, we are not a woke church. You want to get
Oh wow.
and
Yeah.
that as being a statement of we're something different. So.
Right. So then, if we look at that, then as you're saying that churches are stating we are non-woke.
Yeah.
And from the basic of what we've just described, it seems like a positive thing to be anti-injustice, racial injustice,
Sure.
naivete, ignorance.
Yeah.
So why then do we have some churches that are saying we're not woke,
Right.
and other churches that would probably, so here would be a way to put it. One church is waving the flag of wokeness, and one church is denouncing the flag of wokeness.
Yeah.
So where does
Tearing down the
that, not
flag.
where do we sit on that, but what do we do with that?
Well, that's really difficult. And I here's the challenge, always the challenge that we have in Christianity, is because there's always going to be some truth in whatever's going on, and we have to be discerning and just very diligent in testing it out and going, okay, there's some things, absolutely, unequivocally, as a believer, as a Christian, I am against racism, absolutely. The Bible is about equality, and we mentioned the term last week, imago Dei, and everybody's made in the image of God. So this absolute equality, and racism is anti-biblical.
Right.
There's no question. But it comes down to, maybe again, kind of what we talked about last week when we were talking about social injustice or social justice. Motivation and heart matters, and kind of the foundation. And so I think some of the stuff with woke comes out of, and not wanting to get too academic, but it comes out of this thought, school of thought, which is critical thinking or critical theory.
Theory, yeah.
Critical theory, not critical thinking. We can be critical thinkers. But critical theory. So a lot of times you hear it's critical race theory.
Yeah.
Around the whole woke concept, and without going into great detail, critical theory is actually a Marxist idea. And I'm not trying to brand it, but that's where it comes from. Marx.
Its origins are
its
Marxism.
origin, yeah. Karl Marx and actually Sigmund Freud are
Right.
kind of two of the sources, and then it came through what's called the School of Frankfurt and in the 1950s. And but what it sets out to do is it sets out to essentially, in a lot of ways, simplify world structure and social structure to be a series of either you are a group of, if you're in one class, you're an oppressor, and if you're in another class, you're the oppressed. So anybody that's, so like in woke culture, white male white privilege is the oppressor.
White people.
White people,
Yep.
and everybody else,
All minorities.
anybody that's not white male, is the oppressed. Mm-hmm. And once we come awake to the reality that there's a systemic oppression going on, that's when we're woke. Mm. And that's where, in reality, that's where it starts to become problematic for me biblically and as a Christian. Not racism. Racism is always bad. Oppression is always bad. The Bible talks so much about the voice, being a voice for those who are oppressed, and especially Old Testament is so strongly tuned to those that are oppressed. In fact, even what Jesus said in New Testament echoes that when he talks about when you visited me in prison. Mm-hmm. When you did all these different things. You fed me, you clothed me, you did those things that you were doing it to me. When you did it the least of these, my brethren, you're doing it to me, right? Because the biblical voice is very strong about being champions for those that are oppressed. But where the woke culture and systemic or critical thinking comes in, is it kind of, it moves the responsibility from individuals to groups. So essentially, if you are white, male, in North America, because it doesn't work everywhere else in the world, if you're white male, then you are automatically a racist, right? Not I'm a racist because of my individual personal choices and decisions I make and how I rock, but just the fact that you grew up in that system makes you racist.
Wouldn't that lead to the idea that so if you've got oppressor, oppressed, and
yeah, sure.
we are sitting here as white males,
yeah, totally,
so would that not lead to the idea that you are part of the oppressors because of your lack of voice against the oppression?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I mean,
you've used the term racism a lot, and I know in the last year and a half, through a couple of weeks ago was the anniversary of George Floyd's death. Yeah, Black Lives Matter movement throughout the last year has been prevalent,
and even Canadian. I mean, just a little over a week ago, the graves of 215 children in the residential school in Kamloops were discovered.
Of course,
residential schools, racism.
Yeah. So, what I was going to say about racism is I think racism, the term, has, in the same way as the social justice, woke culture, it has become a less definable term from individual to individual.
Right.
Because I think what's happened is, at one time we would have said racism was your blatant devaluing of another. Right. Based on a ethnicity, a race,
or treating somebody in a different way because of their.
Yes. So where now I think that a lot of the understanding around racism isn't that it's just the devaluing of someone, but it's rather not standing up for the value of someone.
Right.
Right. So let's talk about Black Lives Matter. I don't know why we are, but I don't feel. I don't feel equipped to.
Yeah, sure. I don't feel
but-
equipped in this whole conversation.
Yeah. But so it's not just that, I'm a white male. What do I do in regards to Black Lives Matter? Where we, I think Christianity stands for, of course, the imago Dei, right? So the value of all human beings. So is there a cultures of racism? Yes or no? And then what do I do? Well, you march with Black Lives Matter, or those sort of things. So that's how you depict that you are anti-racism or whatnot, because you're not just not devaluing them, but you're standing up for the value of other races. Like I know last year when we were doing our devotionals.
Sure.
On Instagram, and we had Charles and Alicia, and Charles talked about his experiences here in the Okanagan, I guess.
Yeah.
And I felt very ignorant and naive in that, listening to that conversation about how he was treated as a Black man in the North Okanagan, where I would think, I probably wouldn't have believed anyone if it wasn't that I knew this person was. Like I wouldn't have believed it secondhand. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Because it seems so absurd to me. But the term racism has come to mean something different than just, are you devaluing another person based on the race, but are you standing up for the value?
Yeah, I think, that's a really great question, comment, observation is are we standing up for it? I think where it gets really, to me, it gets more complicated and tricky is we start moving into this area of real injustice and perceived injustice.
Okay.
As soon as we empower or we paint a class of people as something, so white males as racist, or whatever it would be, the church is oppressive. As soon as we do that, we color our perspective. So now I'm okay. If I go into this is true on a micro level as well as on a macro level. So on a micro level, if I go into a room assuming that I'm not going to classroom, I assume I'm not going to do well. I begin to read the situation that way. If I assume I'm not liked, I'm going to read the situation. Now, I want to be really careful because I don't want anybody going out there saying, I think racism is just perceived. Because I don't think that's the case. I think there's absolutely racism takes place. But I think we have to be really careful that we acknowledge and stand up for what is racism, what is discrimination, what is those things, and not just, well, I feel like somebody's, that we're not caught in this thing of I'm perceived injustice. If it's injustice, absolutely, but perceived injustice. And the reason I say that is because when we pick up perceived injustice, that's what the Bible calls offense. And when we pick up somebody else's offense, it becomes a trap to us. Okay, so when we pick up, so say, this is an example. Say I was with Charles, and I was out, and we were out in downtown, and somebody made a comment to him that wasn't appropriate, or I made a comment to us that wasn't appropriate. Now he could choose to say, "Oh, they're saying that to me because I'm Black," which it may be true. I don't know. That would be racism. But if, on the other hand, if they would have said the same thing to me, but because of my perception, I went, "Oh, they said that to you because you're Black. They said that to you because you're a person of color," and so then I'm offended on your behalf. Well, suddenly I'm offended on your behalf. Well, now my motivation isn't restoring justice; it's vindictive. Right? And so, if we're not careful, and I mean this sincerely, if we're not careful to just discern, be able to discern and really test real injustice and perceived injustice, which means I think something, because, we've all been in this situation, and it doesn't have to do with racism or anything, where we think somebody said something and they looked at me like that. Well, I know what they meant, because we are assuming we know somebody else's motivation. And anytime we think we know somebody else's motivation, we almost always get it wrong.
Right.
And that's when we get offended. And the Bible's got a lot of clarity on that offense traps us, right? So then we become reduced in our effectiveness rather than empowered. So we're becoming vindictive rather than releasing. The idea of opposing racism is to bring freedom,
Mm-hmm.
not to be vindictive, right? And I think a lot of what woke culture has brought to the forefront, what I see anyway, is people do need to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely the case.
Mm-hmm.
People need to be responsible. But the thread of the Bible is also restorative. Woke culture is not restorative justice.
Right.
It's vindictive justice.
Well, I guess often the outcome in woke culture, I guess from my perception, what I've seen is, I can't be 10% woke. Generally.
Right. Yeah,
You're either
sure.
woke or not unwoked.
Right.
The wokeless.
Yeah.
I need to find the right term there.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm just trying to think of what the term is. So often you're either woke or unwoke, and you lose out on. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I'm trying to think. You were saying
It's a tough topic. It's just a tough topic.
Yeah.
Because I mean, at the very core, the message just is that, it's, and you're right, it's not just racism, but it's anti-oppression, the oppressed people. And that's a biblical message. But when we keep coming back to motivation, it's the same thing when we talked about social justice. Heart matters, like our motivation, our heart in all of this matters.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of being woke isn't restorative. I'm aware of this. But the problem here's a dilemma that I find with it. If as a white male, and now I'm woke, well, I'm accepting a cloak of I'm a racist oppressor, right? That's now become my identity
Well,
because of my class.
Yeah. Well, because of being white.
Because of being white, right?
because
Yeah,
you're white.
my race class, right? So
Okay,
because of being white and male, under a woke culture, I am a racist. Okay, that's non-negotiable. Where's redemption in that? Because I can't change that I'm white male.
Yeah.
Right? And the whole Bible is transformative. But woke culture has in the same sense it said, it's put all these other labels and on groups and classes. But there's no restoration in there. There's no redemption in there. There's essentially no room for it, which says to me that although the outward idea, I'm anti-racist. Abraham X. Kendi, his book How to Be an Anti-Racist. All those things, I'm not anti-racism, anti-oppression. All those things are biblical concepts. The problem is the woke culture has taken the core biblical message out of it, which is redemption. And so woke culture seeks to change the past by eliminating its memory. Jesus seeks to change the past by eliminating its effect. And that's redemption.
Right.
Right, so woke culture. I don't think we should keep up memorials to, blatantly racist individuals, and on it, and we shouldn't do that. But on the other hand, tearing down an anger, tearing that down doesn't change anything. What we need to be, and I think this is a real important thing with church and believers, is that the church is an incredibly forward-facing, future-facing body, future-facing group, because we're believing in a better future. And that doesn't mean erasing our past; it means redeeming our past. And woke culture, because it's so anger-driven. I'm angry at the injustices. So what I get in the sense, some of woke culture is, you've oppressed us all this for so long. Now you're going to get some of your medicine back. In in the anger and the angst in it. And I can understand that. I mean, I totally understand it. I'm not, here's where I'm getting a problem. I don't understand racism personally because I haven't experienced it. But I've been in situations, not nearly as frequent or not nearly as often, but in situations where, I am disadvantaged or, less than the group I'm with. But to try to retaliate because it happened, try to turn the tables is not biblical. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you're ranking hard on woke culture.
Well, I don't mean to. I really don't mean to.
I think though what you're saying is less woke culture and more the effects it has. So, like, to me, I think, and maybe that's the evolution of what happens. When you take one step this way, this is the end path, right? But to me, I think being aware of racism around, being aware
Sure.
of oppression around is
Totally.
good.
Yeah.
I think where I would take question on some of what I see in woke culture is the belief that being aware of it then equals all are it, right? So, I really have appreciated becoming more aware of how racism affects or sexism affects.
Totally.
Like you said, you and I intersection to a number of what you would call oppressive
classes,
right?
Yeah.
Being male is
Yeah.
one, so male versus female,
White.
being cisgender versus not, right? So those sort of things.
Being tall.
Being tall. I don't know. I had a hard time.
In some world, yeah.
I had a hard time finding a bike because I was tall. So maybe I think it's being. I don't know. But so I've been appreciative of being aware of those sort of things. I think what happens sometimes in woke culture is that it goes from awareness to segregation in some ways. Does that make sense? From aware of these injustices or these issues to I am now defined by my class, not by my individual. Yeah. So I guess I would say I feel like there's some great things that have been good about being awoken to some of these things.
100%. Yeah.
But some of the byproduct, like you were saying, wherever I lost my train of thought, and now if you were to blend these together, no, it was just talking about that you're not a percentage of woke, you're either woke or unwoke, which the outcome of that is what we've found to be cancel culture.
Yeah,
because you're canceled because you're woke or
which
you're
again,
unwoke.
there's no redemption.
Right.
And that flows through so much. What's happening in culture right now is not, whether it's woke or cancel culture or anything else. It's this binary. You're either
black and white.
You're either
all for us or
all for us or all against us.
Right.
And which is not, again, that's not a biblical message. The disciples tried to make it that way, and Jesus said, no, it's not the case, because the disciples saw this group of people, they were doing miracles, and they said, well, they're not with us, and so should we call down fire and destroy them? Yeah. Should we cancel them permanently? Yeah. And Jesus says, no, if they're not against us, they're for us, which was a strange way of thinking, and it would be a strange way of thinking now. Oh no, if you're not against this, then obviously you're for it.
Right.
If you're not saying anything, then what's that mean? Right. But so I want to come back to woke because I don't want to leave the impression that I think the whole motivation behind woke is evil or bad, because I don't think so. Racism, oppression, those things are super vital concepts, not just concepts, are super vital things that as a church, we need to be active in. As individuals, we need to be active in. But my big concern, like I would, here's what I'd say about myself. I would not say I'm woke. I wouldn't use the term. I wouldn't say I'm against it.
10% woke,
which puts me, which puts me in, culturally puts me in a very difficult situation. I'm not woke, but I'm not anti-woke. So I'm also not siding with other evangelical churches that I've seen that go, we're against, we're anti-woke, and we mock the whole concept. I'm not mocking the concept because it's brought some things to the surface that needed to be brought to the surface. Rampant racism needed to be brought to the surface. Oppression needed to be brought to the surface, so it would be addressed. Because if you don't see something, you can't address it. It needed to happen. But there has to be a path for redemption. I see some things, when I reading news or things where they'll talk about, he's the, grandson of a slave owner. Therefore, there's some, we need, there's an issue. He's a racist because he's a grandson of a, slave owner. Again, that's just not biblical to have that reaction. As you near the end of the Old Testament, God says, he says, I'm not going to hold the children responsible for their parents' sins. And yet, isn't that what we're doing? Isn't that the end result of some of the woke culture? We're holding the grandchildren, great-grandchildren of slave owners responsible for their parents' sins. Which, let's be clear, parents' sins were sins. They were wrong. They were against the way of God. That was not a godly thing. But if there's no path to redemption, there's no hope. And I guess that's one of the things that I wrestle with woke culture is there's not really a hope there. There's not a hope for me. Right. Not a hope for you. There's not a hope for a lot of people because I can't change my class or my race. And I understand that the reality is for a lot of people who've been subject to racism, they feel that hopelessness. But the answer is not to make everybody else feel it that way. The answer is for us to change it. And we keep coming back to this every conversation is that it comes down to a heart issue, comes down to God working in our hearts, and comes down to understanding grace and relationships. God wants to restore relationships, not cancel them. God wants to bring grace, restoration, so that we can have a future together.
So there's a word you've used. I know you used it this week and last week, and I think you've used it a bit. You've used the word discern. Yeah. So you've talked about how we need to discern in our heart, what's going on, and you've referenced today. You've got evangelical churches, so churches that would. By evangelical, that means churches that are in a similar belief system as we would be.
We're evangelical.
So you've got evangelical churches that are anti-woke, these sort of things. Now, I would argue, well, isn't that them discerning? So where is discernment when there's disagreement around church?
Here's historically, I think church has had a particular problem. One of many. I think historically church has taught something that doesn't have a clear biblical basis, and that's this whole idea of all or nothing. And I can't remember which epistle it is, but one of the writers talks about what he calls the doctrine of demons, which teaches the abstinence of. So the church has typically done this, here's the expression, thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Right. We don't acknowledge that woke culture has brought to light some things that we need to bring to light. Instead, we went, there's bad stuff here. Throw the whole thing out. Right. Church has a hard time with grace. Yeah. Yeah. Which is funny because grace is the hardest atmosphere to live in is grace because it requires maturity and thinking. I mean, let's be honest. Woke culture would be easy for the church if we just said it's right or it's wrong. Yeah. Yes. Right? Woke culture's right. There you go. Simple solution. You don't have to think for yourself. You don't have to sort it through. You don't have to look at your own attitudes. You don't have to look at your own thoughts or your own heart. Just follow that. But that's not grace. Grace is like, I got to look at this and say, here's the key. Everything's permissible, but not everything's beneficial. And so I have to discern it through that lens. Is this beneficial? I'll tell you what, bringing racism issues to light is beneficial. So it turns my heart. Listening to Charles and Alicia talk about that, my heart was aching for them. That's beneficial, right? Being vindictive, trying to get judgment or justice as a result of that, not so beneficial. The problem, somebody says this, I heard this years ago, and it stuck with me. This is the problem with the eye for eye and a tooth for tooth is two people lose an eye. Nobody gets one back. And that's not the message of the New Testament. The message of the New Testament is restorative, not vindictive. I don't know if we're getting...
Well, yeah, I think these are tough.
There's no easy ones because the thing is, it just requires us to think and to feel and to process, not just wholeheartedly embrace. And it's just so much easier to just embrace. Yeah. And instead say, weigh it out, discern it out. What's beneficial, what's not.
I guess I would add to what you're saying about weighing and to think and process in this is it also requires us to maintain a proper filter. And what I mean by that is I think with any ideology or belief system, it's easy to grab onto it and then try and work out our faith based on this ideology we've grabbed onto, rather than grab onto our faith and work out how this ideology works in our faith.
Sure.
Right? So it's not just it's not just woke, cancel culture, purity culture, any of these sort of things, but it's actually let's define that representation by what has Jesus said, what is Jesus's, so you've brought it back quite regularly. Okay, well, the gospel is restorative. So woke is now let's look at that in the idea of how does that become restorative?
Right. Sure.
So yes, we need to pull away from naivete, and we need to bring to light things that are taking place that you didn't know before. But how does that work with the concept of being restorative, or biblical justice? Or, these sort of things.
How do we restore the environment that God intended where there's no racism?
Right.
Not how do we punish racists?
Right.
Right. And not that we don't hold people accountable, but that's not our end goal. Our end goal is let's restore that. We're all made in the image of God.
Right.
Because the point of the Bible is that everyone would be reconciled in God. Right. So that becomes the point.
Yeah. No, I think that's terrific. Just bringing that back to, okay, let's take any of these societal things and let's filter them back through what Jesus is saying, what God has said, what biblical representation of that is.
And I think, just on even like a broader spectrum, when I think about some of the mindsets that produce woke culture, that produce cancel culture, is stereotyping. We conclude that, the police officer who held George Floyd down for 9 minutes till he died, we conclude that because he's a police officer, therefore all police officers are bad. And we see a lot of that happen. But it happens in church too. We see somebody in government that isn't honest, so we conclude that government's corrupt. And then we allow that to give us permission to not be respectful. We allow that to give us permission to act in a way that Jesus did. There's a maybe this is kind of where I need to end up with this, but there's this really interesting encounter in the book of Acts. Paul the Apostle, who, he's known as an outspoken preacher of the gospel. And, we'd think of him in being fiery and challenging and, doing that. But there's this one little kind of cameo appearance he makes in the Jewish council. And he's essentially sitting in this room of the leaders of the Jewish people. And one of the guys, he starts to say something, and one of the guys tells the guy next to him to slap him in the face. Oh. Is what he does, okay? And he slaps him, and Paul just like blows up, and he says, you whitewashed sepulcher, you basically, you pile of, whatever. And And he just yelled, and the guy says to me, he says, it's the high priest. And Paul backs down and he goes, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were the priest. I'm sorry. Even in that context, Paul had a biblical respect. Even though he was personally injured, it was corrupt, but yet he responded out of respect. It's you read stories, it blows you away.
This is in Acts, you said.
Book of Acts, yeah, that's right. Anything. It's just quite remarkable how Paul responds, because Paul used his citizenship as a way to see Caesar.
Yeah.
He took all the advantages of his place in society and his rightful role. I'm a Canadian. I have a right as a Canadian citizen.
Paul wasn't a Canadian.
No, but I'm just bringing in the context. I have all these rights as a Canadian citizen.
Yeah.
And yet he didn't use that in a disrespectful way. And when he went, I was mistreated. I go, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting scenario, because we have so much stuff going on even now, with all the COVID and everything else, where we want to kind of blanket categorize government,
groups,
or categorize anti-vaxxers or pro-vaxxers, all that stuff, and blanket categorize them, and lose respect. And yet the Bible says, no, there's something else. Let's not do that. We're individuals, and we're individually accountable for God. So it's pretty interesting.
Well, that's I'm shocked to have you share a Bible story from the book of Acts, nonetheless, not like some obscure, prophet or Leviticus or something like that. But I would be surprised to hear who else knows the story that you're referring to.
That's interesting.
But we'll look it up in Acts. I'm sure it's sort of like an aside.
It's just a little cameo. Yeah.
Acts 23.
Acts
That's what
23.
the teams. See, they were.
The text have told us they've been checking it out.
They were fact checking.
We're getting fact checked.
Fact check.
We're getting fact checked. It's good.
Mid-service fact check.
It's good. It's good. Yeah. It's a really interesting insight into Paul's, because he seems very anti-establishment and but there's this insight into Paul's character. He used his legal rights to him, but yet he never lost his respect.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I think that's got to be the best way for us to end this conversation on woke culture. Couldn't ask for a better way to end that. Wow, that's absolutely terrific. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again for this conversation. And
hey, should
Dave,
we mention, just kind of some of the stuff coming? Because like a weekend, a bit ago, they made some changes. And
yeah, I'll mention that again.
Sure.
But what I want to talk about is, so this was our fourth session in this series on current affairs. Next week, we're going to be talking about another one and concluding with faith deconstruction.
Everything we talked
faith
about.
Faith deconstruction and the church. Again, sort of a word that we'll get to define next week a bit. But we'd really want you to tune in and be a part of that. Tune into any of the previous services. Hit subscribe, hit like. As Pastor Dave mentioned, a week and a half ago, there were some changes in the public health order.
Right. So we're doing some stuff
and so there's some things that we just want to make sure that you're in the know about. Firstly, is we're going to be continuing these series this way after next week when we do faith deconstruction and the church. Right. The following week is Father's Day. Right. So that is June 20th. And on June 20th, we're going to be doing similar to what we did on Mother's Day. So it'll be a conversation on fatherhood with Pastor Dave and Pastor Kim. And then after that, from that final Sunday, so June, or after Father's Day, so June 27th until Labor Day weekend in September, we're going to be doing a series called Voices and Stories. Yeah. And Voices and Stories is going to be 20 services, micro services, so under half an hour. They're going to be released twice a week, and we are going to have a different voice in each of those. So what that means is you'll hear from someone.
So I'm going to use my Grover voice. I'm going to use my Elmo voice.
So it'll come from someone from our church across the region is going to share a 10-minute devotional or their testimony, their story. So those are going to be really powerful, really exciting.
Looking forward to it.
And then during the summer, we are going to prioritize two things. We're going to prioritize community building and getting around worship and prayer. So you won't see us in the summer, you will not see us do in-person services on Sundays at 10 a.m. like we would have historically done.
Yeah, and part of that too is that the restrictions still haven't changed sufficiently for us to do service like we would. But we don't know when they'll change that way and whether they get pulled back.
And this is just the trajectory that we're on.
Yeah.
I think irrelevant of whether they change,
Right.
this is the trajectory we're on. And what we're going to prioritize is getting together, whether that be around men's breakfasts, women's wine nights, or vacation Bible school, or, those sort of things. And you'll
guys get beer and wings, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I don't drink beer or eat meat, so that doesn't work for me. And tofu wings does not sound exciting, and near beer doesn't. Anyways, but we're community gatherings in that capacity, as well as things like worship nights or worship events, prayer gatherings. So we're going to be gathering still around the sacraments and those sort of things, but just not specifically.
Just not a regular
Sunday
like
in-person gathering. Until September, then we'll be doing that.
Looking at that
but
again.
that is all the details for that. We have communion taking place right after the service. Please join us on Zoom.
On Zoom, you see
that link that you see there will be live for another minute once we close here.
And if you miss the link there, you can go to our website and just click through to the actual website. Don't go to the Sunday service, but click to the website.
Links are always on the website.
There. Yeah,
that's right. Well, that's it. Awesome. Thank you so much. Think about your questions about faith deconstruction for next week, and we'll take it from there. We love you guys.
Devil-free week.
See you soon.
See you soon.